Hello, hello, hello. Hola, Madrid. Hello, Audio Day. I am very happy to be here to present to you all the latest in podcast and audio research in the United States. Few of you know me, but many of you don't, so allow me to reintroduce myself. My name is Gabriel Soto, and I am a senior director at a company in the US called Edison Research. My three favorite hobbies include one, I love the outdoors. Hiking and kayaking offer the best views of the world, in my opinion. Two, this little guy right here, Everest. I adopted a German Shepherd puppy in November, and it's been a joy to watch him grow up into a confident, sweet dog that I want him to become. Hobby number three, spoken word audio. I love listening to you. People who create spoken word audio. If you think of audio, you can divide it up into two different categories. On one hand, there's music, and on the other hand, there's spoken word audio. That includes talk radio, audiobooks, and even things like podcasts. And in the US, if you were to put all the time spent listening to audio each day by the American population in 2014, 20% of that time came from spoken word audio content. Fast forward a decade later into 2023, and that spoken word audio content now represents 31% of all the time that Americans spent listening to audio. That's a 55% increase, a dramatic increase that we haven't seen before. Now, you can uncover a lot of data and tell many stories from just this one graph, but what I want to focus on today is a specific demographic in the United States that has been responsible for some of the recent growth in spoken word audio. And those are US Latinos. Latinos who identify as Hispanic or Latino are those that can tie their heritage or ancestry back to a Latin American country like Mexico or Argentina, La República Dominicana. And they represent an incredible opportunity because if you think about it, Latinos actually have seen a significant increase in spoken word audio listening since 2014 as well. It used to be that Latinos didn't spend as much time as the general population listening to spoken word audio, but today that isn't true. The time spent listening to spoken word audio among the Latino population has caught up to the US population, 31%. And in addition to that, Latinos also spend more time listening to audio content in general. They spend an average of 1 hour more listening to audio each day compared to the US population here on the left, 5 hours and 21 minutes. So this represents an incredible opportunity for many brands and audio creators like yourselves. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. I want to introduce you to the different opportunities that exist among this fast-growing demographic of the US population. And I don't think there's a better way to introduce you to these opportunities than by introducing you to my family. So my family, here's a picture. I told them we were going to be at a conference in Spain and got them all to sit down and take a picture. As you can see, there are many different types of Latinos. There are young Latinos and there are wise Latinos. There are also foreign-born Latinos, those that were born outside of the U.S. and those that were born in the U.S., third generation. There are many heritages represented here, those from Mexico, Puerto Rico, Nicaragua. This represents a microcosm of the Latino population in the U.S. It's a very diverse group of people. It's not a monolith, and someone in California who identifies as Latino is going to be someone, it's going to be a lot different than a person in New York or someone from a small town who just recently migrated to the U.S. So there's a lot of diversity. It's a people that are rich in culture, and if you can reach this demographic, you'll be able to reach them with different stories throughout the entire landscape of the Latino demographic. So That's one opportunity, diversity. But it's more than just diversity. Reaching Latinos is also a smart business move. Now, for those of you that are an only child in your family, I want to tell you what it's like growing up with older siblings. I grew up with 4 older brothers, and I know what you're thinking, because everyone always says the same 5 words when they hear that I grew up with 4 older brothers. Oh God, your poor mother. Everyone says your poor mother, but no one ever says poor you. I have a lot of fond memories growing up with my brothers. Ripped Batman underwear by way of wedgies, being left behind at the supermarkets. But I also have some productive memories too. My brothers, when I was little, they taught me how to sell my mother's hot sauce to the neighbors around the apartment complex that we grew up in. And they were really business oriented, always trying to find a way to make money. If you ask my brothers, that's me, bottom left, older brothers, if you were to ask my older brothers if investing in Latinos is a great opportunity, they would say yes, without a doubt. Today, the Latino population is growing, and it's one of the fastest growing segments in the U.S., and they represent 19% of the population. That translates to over 63 million people in the U.S., and you also have to take into context their age. Their median age is 30, which is 11 years younger compared to the non-Latino population. A lot of brands take notice of this, and that's why they designate the Latinos of the U.S. as one of the future audiences in the country. Excuse me. Now, taking this into account, the investment for Latinos it's going to pay off if you put a bet on them. But it's also important to take note of how much purchasing power they control today. $2.8 trillion US. That's how much they control in gross domestic product, according to the Latino Donor Collaborative report in 2022. Taking this into context, if Latinos were their own standalone country, they would represent the 5th largest economy in the world, an economy larger than that of the United Kingdom and the billions of people in India, even bigger than countries, Latin American countries and Spanish-speaking countries like Mexico, and yes, even Spain. Now, this is what my brothers would call that smart business, bro. An opportunity that's clear for many of you here today. And but investing in Latinos is going to be a smart business move, but how are you going to reach them? Well, for an audio creator, I want to introduce you to my best friend. Everyone has a best friend. This is mine. His name is Tim Butts. If you don't know what that means, it means trasero in Spanish. Tim Butts. No one ever believes him, so he always has to keep his ID on him in order to prove it to people. Our friend group, we call him T-Booty. Now, Tim Butts, he always has this dream that he wants to become an influencer, and every time we have a great conversation with our friend group, he's like, oh, guys, we should have recorded that, because that would have been a great podcast. It happens all the time, and I'm going to give you guys the same advice that I would give to Tim. Just start a podcast already. It's what I call the T-Booty, get your booty on a podcast opportunity. See, for Latinos, they have been adopting podcasts at a faster rate than the U.S. population. Since the top of the decade, listenership, the percentage of Latinos that listen to podcasts has increased by 52%, which is 3 times bigger than the growth rate of the U.S. population, which is 14%. As you can see here, today, 38% of U.S. Latinos listen to a podcast every month. That shot up from 25% in 2020. That translates to 17 million adults in the United States. On top of that, the time spent listening to podcasts among Latinos represents half of the time they spent with audio. If you look at the wheel on the left, 48%. For non-Latino Americans, that podcast share is at 33%. So as you can see here, Latinos are poised to continue influencing the podcasting market, and brands are paying attention because of this. They also are noticing that Latinos who earn a higher income are more likely to listen to podcasts. Today, a third of Latinos who listen to podcasts are making an annual income of 75,000 US dollars or more every year, compared to 21% of Latinos who do not listen to podcasts. Now, you can reach Latinos on podcasts through different types of content. These are some of the top listed contents that Latinos are listening to. So Latino podcast listeners, 57% say they listen to comedy, 40% say they listen to health and fitness, which has shot up from 24% since 2020. You can see listening has shot up to these topics across the board, and that's because in 2020, Latinos were a very young and rookie audience compared to the general U.S. population. Now that they become more veteran, you can see that they're dabbling and experimenting with different topics. So as more content comes out, especially content that caters to Latinos, they're spending more time listening to different types of new content. Latinos are going to start to see a rise in this content, and you as a creator can take advantage of that. But at the same time, it's also going to saturate the market. So you're going to have to find different ways to cut through the noise and reach listeners and make your content stand out. I want to give you guys a few tips on how to do that. So one of the things that we're seeing is the way Latinos are discovering podcasts is unique. And here's a tip for you. By introducing you to my niece, Ashley, who discovered her favorite podcast, Call Her Daddy, through this platform. It's the same platform that her brother, Sebastian, who we call Teeny, says kills brain cells, but he still uses it anyway. Ashley, Teeny. And this is my advice to you. So put a teeny bit of your content on social media as soon as possible. The way they discover podcasts is through short-form audio on popular platforms like TikTok and Instagram, even Snapchat, even YouTube Shorts. In 2023, this is why Twitter is still named Twitter on here. This study occurred in January 2023. We measured the different types of social media platforms that Latinos are using in general. And some of the fastest growth we've seen has been on short-form audio platforms like TikTok. It's a way that Latinos are discovering their new podcasts and new content to watch. So take that into account when you look for ways to cut through the noise. Now, there's also a different platform that I want you to know about. And I want to introduce you to my nephew, Damian, who we call Mambo. Now, Mambo was the first person that I know that loves to watch other people play video games on YouTube more than he actually likes to play the video games himself. And when I first discovered this, I was baffled because when I was little, I used to ask my brothers, I begged my brothers to play video games with them, and they would give me the controller, but little did I know, like the picture here, that the controller was disconnected. So, YouTube is actually disrupting the way that people are consuming video games, watching instead of playing them themselves. And they're also disrupting the way that people are listening to podcasts. Today, YouTube is the #1 source for podcast listening among Latinos in the U.S. It's been like that since 2020, and it occurred before it happened with the general U.S. population. Today, it's arguably between Spotify and YouTube that the U.S. general podcast audience spends most of their time listening to the medium. It's also the #1 source for discovering podcasts as well. People like Mambo, Latinos like Mambo, are using YouTube for other content, and they're coming across podcasting on YouTube. So it's a great way to distribute your podcast. Unfortunately, it's going to require you to step outside of your comfort zone. Many of you are probably used to being an audio-only platform in podcasting. But with the increase in popularity for podcast consumption through YouTube, it's going to require you to also create content with a video in order to stand out on the video-first platform. So the opportunity in YouTube leads to also to more video content consumption as well. Since 2020, the number of Latinos who have been listening to podcasts that includes a video component has increased. So if you look at the second section here, 80% of Latinos say they've ever listened to a podcast with the video component that they actively watch while listening, compared to 70% in 2021. And that has surpassed the number of Latinos who say they listen to podcasts with an audio-only version, right? No video component. So in order to stand out, you're going to have to create video. Times are changing, and it depends on the content that you're creating. But in the podcasting format, video has become a very popular way of consuming the content. Now, there's also a very special opportunity that I still believe exists among U.S. Latinos, and it's probably the opportunity that's most relevant to you. And I'll introduce my parents, and they represent this opportunity. This is my dad and my mom. I'm here, bottom left, Luis and Flora. My dad worked, growing up, worked 2 jobs to get us, to pay the rent, to make sure we had food on the table. And my mom, she was a housewife. One of the coolest things that she did was actually when we went to the movie theaters, we were going to see the movie Coco, which many of you might be familiar with. A woman who was really scared to open the door for the Amazon delivery driver, and she wouldn't really talk to strangers. She was brave enough to sneak in tamales and tacos to the movie Coco. We booked out the whole row for our entire family, and in the middle, all we hear is say, "¿Quieren tamales?" The coolest thing my mom ever did. She was brave enough, for the love of her family, to sneak in those tamales. They represent the Spanish-speaking opportunity. Today, 23% of U.S. Latinos have listened to an English language podcast in the last week, compared to 13% who have listened to a Spanish language podcast in the last week. Now, the ceiling here, I believe, is high because, well, before I get ahead of myself, talk about the benefits of those that listen to Spanish language content. Because it happens to be more relevant, at least I think, it leads to more engagement with different brands. Weekly Spanish language podcast consumers who are Latino are more likely to gather more information about a product after hearing about it on a podcast ad. They're also more likely to recommend a product every month after hearing it on a podcast ad, and they're more likely to purchase the product. 37% of Spanish language podcast listeners purchase a product every month, compared to 29% of general weekly Latino podcast listeners. So brands need to take notice of this too. Spanish language content helps them connect you, and it results in action taken by the Latino audience. Now, the opportunity, this is what I mean by the opportunity that I think exists. There's still a high ceiling for Spanish language content. And that's because it's not that Latinos don't want to listen to Spanish language content. It's also because Latinos just simply don't know what the podcasting medium is. As you can see here, 81% of those Latinos born in the U.S. are familiar with the term podcasting, compared to 61% of those that were born outside of the U.S. The medium is still growing, and it's still booming, and I think there's a lot of growth to be had among the population who is predominantly Spanish dominant and those that were born outside of the U.S. And that's because smartphone ownership is still very high, and this represents the ceiling that exists there. 82% of Latinos of those born outside of the U.S. have the capability to listen to a podcast if they wanted to. Now, this opportunity is also very unique because if you were to create content to Latinos in Spanish, you're not only reaching Latinos in the U.S., you also have the potential to reach Latinos in Latin America and even Spanish-speaking population here in Spain. And it's what the opportunity, I call it, flourish like Florida in multiple countries. Now, I also want to introduce you to my baby, Everest, as you can see, not a human baby yet. But what he's doing here, he's actually the family member in the household that listens to the most audiobooks. He knows everything about Elon Musk. He knows how to navigate Hogwarts after listening to all of the Harry Potter books. So he knows a lot about audiobooks. He falls asleep to it. I play it for him when I leave him alone because it helps comfort him, and it allows him to think that someone else is around and he doesn't get as much separation anxiety. So Everest loves to listen to audiobooks, but I would recommend for you not to do the same thing. Don't sleep on audiobooks. Don't underestimate the platform because it's a growing platform. Compared to the U.S. population, Latino adoption of audiobooks has increased a lot more compared to the U.S. population. On the left, today, the U.S. population has increased, adoption of audiobooks has increased by 18% since the top of the decade, and for Latinos, that's a significantly higher rate of 35%. 46% of U.S. Latinos listen to audiobooks. While we don't have the most comprehensive data on Latinos and audiobooks, I still believe that the lack of Spanish language content available to Latinos in the audiobook platform is something that's preventing Latinos who were born outside of the U.S., who predominantly speak Spanish, from adopting the platform and retaining that demographic on the platform. Now, don't sleep on audiobooks. That's the opportunity. The last thing I want to share is not something you'll find in a data presentation, but it's more of a personal piece of advice that I'd give to you. When you look for opportunities, make sure to always look for fear. Fear, for me, represents opportunity. And I first learned about this on my first day of college. First day of university, I still remember the day. It was raining. First, it was a hot summer day, so those raindrops really felt refreshing, and you could smell the raindrops as they hit the concrete sidewalk. As many of you probably know the smell. I was taking a taxi to school, butterflies in my stomach because I was nervous of my first day. I listened on the radio that there was traffic because of an accident, right? I was like, oh God, I'm going to miss my first day of class already. But I made it. After a great day of classes, I was relieved. College is going to be cool. I made some new friends. But then I get a phone call, and it's my brother and my mom. They're crying, and they said, Gabriel, your dad was just in an accident. That traffic information that we got on the radio that day on the way to school was actually my dad's accident. He was riding a bike, and he was catapulted when a car hit him going 40 miles per hour, and he was in the hospital, brain bleeding, internal bleeding, and a broken ankle. Whether he was going to live, I did not know. He entered into a coma, and I pretty much cried throughout the whole night, right? Tears drenched my 2 pillows that I used to have back then, and I woke up the next day not knowing whether, because he was the main breadwinner, whether we were going to continue to be able to live in our apartment or how I was going to pay for classes. And that's when I learned that I had to grow up. I had to get the best grades. I had to work hard at my job to pay for school because I was scared. And that fear represented an opportunity. It's the same type of fear that I got when Javier asked me to come present in front of you, right? The same fear that you get when you don't know if you're going to be able to live in the apartment the next month. He ended up waking up from his coma, but his dementia set in quick. The best days of my life, though, happened because I have no regrets of the fear and the obstacles I was able to overcome by chasing that fear. So that's my last tip to you. Fear equals opportunity. It's the same type of fear you might get because you are scared to reach this Latino demographic that you don't know about. Or it's the same type of fear that you get because you need to go on video and you don't know what to do because you're only used to audio. There are many of you, maybe in the corner of the room today, that have a great idea that you want to introduce to your boss, and you're just too scared to do it. What I recommend to you guys is to take note that fear equals opportunity. A door is right in front of you. Speak up and just do what I did today. Introduce yourself and your ideas to the world of audio. Thank you.
Tenemos tiempo para preguntas, ¿eh? O sea que ahí.
Ay, gracias. Hola, buenos días. Mi pregunta la voy a hacer en español, porque mi inglés es tipo Tarzán, así que no me atrevo. Buenos días, Gabriel. Has hablado de la difusión y el consumo de videopodcast a través de YouTube. Pero, ¿cómo hacer un videopodcast? Si, por ejemplo, tú tienes un podcast de ficción, de ciencia ficción, o una audioserie, o eso, porque el formato va como más destinado a la estructura de un podcast tipo entrevista. ¿Cómo hacemos para promocionar un podcast así, de ficción? Porque es complicado y llevarlo a la pantalla, valga. Es como hacer una serie de televisión.
Sí.
Gracias.
Uh-huh. No, the most popular formats when it comes to video podcasts is the video of the hosts talking to each other. And this is also why I said take into consideration your format. Like you said, if you have a fiction podcast and it's about something fictional, a video podcast might not be the best format for that type of show. You would have to create a high production series like TV, like a movie. It becomes a movie at that time. But in order to gain access to those listeners, what I would recommend is consider how you might be able to involve a video of the host telling the podcast. It might include, there's a popular podcast called the Mr. Ballin podcast. He's a true crime. He talks about supernatural stories. He often involves pictures. It's a picture of him, it's a video of him, and he's talking about the story, the event that happened. But then he also includes pictures. He actually he was a social media influencer first. He came from TikTok. He came from YouTube, and now he's the number 14, the biggest, in terms of audience size, the number 14 podcast in the United States. So in a way, you don't have to worry about the high production when it comes to fiction podcasts, but at least getting access to those channels to promote to people that don't listen to podcasts, or maybe that are on YouTube and nowhere else for podcast listening. I would recommend to look into a video like that, right? Something that doesn't require a high production level. Mm-hmm.
Hola, thank you, Gabriel, for your heartfelt presentation.
Mm-hmm.
You're like a celebrity to me because I've seen your reports through the years, so it's great to see you in person. Mm-hmm. You showed a slide in which English-speaking Latinos, I think it was 23% versus Spanish-speaking Latinos listen to podcasts. I know you spoke about the opportunity in the Spanish, but for the English-speaking Latinos, like Gabriel Soto, like what do you listen to? Do you listen to more like Hispanic podcasts that represent your culture? Or you prefer to listen to stuff in English, even though it might not be as diverse because there's not that much offering? Can you talk about English-speaking Latinos? Because I think that's the hardest target because they're so diverse, like you said. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. Right now, if you were to look at the top podcasts, they are not always Latino related. There are a lot of popular Latino related niche podcasts that talk about Latino problems or Latino news or Latino racism, things like that, that apply to Latino related content. But today, what you usually find is that some of the most popular podcasts might be a mainstream podcast. There's a show from Tom Segura, who's he's an Argentinian comedian, and he has done things on his channel and his podcast to indicate that he is Latino. He talks about Latino issues sometimes, but for the most part, it's an audience that caters to the young demographic, American audience in general. So it's not necessarily the shows that are made for Latinos, but maybe shows that where the host happens to be Latino and it's a little bit more mainstream. Those are the top shows, but we also find that those niche shows that talk about Latino issues, Latinos Out Loud, for example, used to be a really popular show, also wouldn't exist without the Latino demographic. But yes, in terms of audience size, it tends to be a little bit more mainstream for now. That's not to say that if new Latino content enters the market, that it would also appeal to them. I don't want to rule that out yet, just based on how young this audience is. Mm-hmm.
Just hold on a sec.
Hi, Gabriel. You first started saying that spoken word audio, even if it's podcast or audiobooks for sure. But my question is, people in America like Eddie Trunk or Howard Stern, they have changed their shows. It's a spoken word show, not music at all. Is this the trend in the future? Even Latinos, population in America, are more interested in listening to podcasting or shows, not interested in listening to music, or it's a mix of music and spoken word? Thank you.
Yeah. Music is always going to be very popular. It's always going to be I think, in my opinion, the type of audio content that people listen to the most. It doesn't require a lot of brain power. You can put it on in the background and listen to it. It stretches out for a very long period of time. Audiobooks and podcasts, on the other hand, require you to pay attention and listen to it in order for you to enjoy it. So music is always going to be popular. And it's not necessarily that people dislike music, and that's why they're listening to spoken word audio more. You have to think about where audio is able to reach different types of audiences and how that has changed in recent years. So audio, it cannot be touched in the home when you're doing other things. When you're doing other things, it's very hard for you to watch the television and pay attention to it, right? If you're doing laundry or cooking. When you're driving, you can't watch TV, you can't watch video. You listen to audio. And in the recent years, the increase in accessibility to spoken word audio on demand, like podcasts and audiobooks, has led to the replacement of music, because people are finding that a lot of this information is helpful to them. It helps them build a community of different types of listeners. So just the increase in accessibility to spoken word audio has led to the replacement of music, where music was often the dominant audio medium, like while I was brushing my teeth, like when I cook or when I drive. Spoken word audio has taken the place of that slowly. Does that answer your question?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What I found out is that today is that people have the chance and the possibility to stream music, whatever, they want it. So listening to music today has become something like, you can listen to music like having a €1 burger or €1 burger. So the thing is, I do believe people are more interested in spoken content rather than listening to music when they approach podcasting or something like that.
Yes, yeah. It's a very addicting medium once you find the right content. Mm-hmm.
Hola, Gabriel. Yo tengo una pregunta. Has dicho que la principal manera de descubrir los podcasts para la audiencia latina en Estados Unidos es YouTube. Y quería saber cuál es la siguiente manera. O sea,
Word of
está
mouth.
YouTube en el top y luego cómo descubren word of mouth.
Word of mouth. Yo te recomiendo un podcast y tú lo escuchas.
Ok, thank you.
Hi, thank you so much. It was very interesting. So, my question is, being an audiobook publisher, how do we get all those podcast listeners into audiobooks? Because my assumption is, at least from the data I know, that it can be very scary going from 30-minute podcast or 1 hour to a 10-hour audiobook. So, do you have any knowledge from your data research, or what do you think?
Yeah, I think the move by Spotify to allow audiobooks to be more accessible is going to lead to some of that overlap in listening. Right now, there is a lot of overlap, but it's not 100% audiobook listeners or podcast listeners. It depends on the type of content that you create. I think many times audio creators are going to be at the mercy of the services and how those audiobooks might be recommended to a podcast listener that consumes a similar type of content. But in terms of, as a creator, when you're reaching out to your community of podcast listeners on social media or vice versa, there's ways that you can still connect relevant content to whatever they're consuming. So if you're a true crime podcast, and there's an episode about Ted Bundy, then you might want to recommend a more comprehensive view of Ted Bundy through an audiobook. So finding different ways to connect the content consumptions across platform is going to be crucial. But they are different audiences. Podcast listeners tend to be more male in general, right? Depends on the topic that they're listening to. And audiobook listeners tend to be more female. So it's a great way to grow an audience for any type of service like Spotify or any type of brand or any type of creator that's looking to expand their demographic portfolio. There's a lot of overlap, but a lot of incremental reach and benefit in reaching both types of listeners.
Thank you.
La última pregunta por ahí.
Thank you. A quick one, Gabriel. Thank you very much. First thing, how important is the accent especially if we talk about audiobooks? Obviously, the accent of the narrator is important. Do you have information about how foreign accents in the Hispanic world are received by Latino audience?
We actually do. We asked the question in 2020. It might have changed by now, but in 2020 we asked if they found a Spanish-speaking accent or an accent different from their own more interesting, or did it bother them? And the majority of people were very open-minded and found an accent that was different from their own more interesting, which would self-reportedly would lead to a way for your podcast to stand out. So a lot of people that are receptive to accents different than their own.